Welcome back to Luminary Leaders Live. I'm your host, Shelley Harrison. Today, we've got a fantastic show with Dr. Fred Moss, and you're going to meet him in just a moment. I wanted to mention that we have a wonderful sponsor for the show, who is Dan Leonard with Endeavor Mortgage. Thank you, Dan, for your ongoing support. And if you would like to contact Dan Leonard with Endeavor Mortgage, feel free to reach out to me or also on LinkedIn. All right, so I'm going to bring on my guest, Dr. Fred Moss, and we are going to be talking about the greatest threat in the world. Are you curious? I bet you are. All right, so here we go. I'm going to bring Dr. Fred on. And Dr. Fred, how are you?
I'm doing great, Shelley. It's great to see you. How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic. And it's
Always
great
great to be with you.
Yeah, great to be with you too, Dr. Fred. And, I have to say that this is a premium episode because we are very fortunate to have you on. You're a very busy man. We're honored to represent you with Luminary Leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And today the topic is, I'm sure that people are curious. What is the greatest threat in the world? Can we start off with that and talk about who you are and, how this came about?
Yeah, sure. So the greatest threat in the world, we'll get to that in just a moment. I think I'm going to hold off on actually speaking to what I think the greatest threat in the world is, because ultimately we're going to lead up to what's obviously the greatest threat in the world. This is like obvious. And some people might think they know what the greatest threat in the world is. And, most people think they do. They have one of their many chosen calamities that are going on in the world, and they pick one of them and call that the greatest threat in the world. The one that might knock humanity right off its perch. Let me say a little bit about who I am. I grew up in a family of two older brothers and my parents, and I learned a lot about communication back then. I remember being in my playpen and watching my parents speak to my brothers, and actually, whatever they were saying to each other, it was very important. It was emotional, and they were getting things done. And I knew that communication was something I wanted to learn.
Yeah.
In elementary school, I did my very best to learn how to communicate, and I thought that communication was mostly speaking. And there certainly is no teacher in my elementary school who ever forgot having Dr. Fred as one of their students. And so I was a speaker. I was very articulate and very, I was someone who, grew up ahead of my time.
Very passionate too. I know you're very passionate.
Pretty passionate back then
work
as well. Yep.
Yeah.
And the idea was that, I didn't learn how to communicate in school. That was in a good place. In fact, I was told to be quiet most of the time. And as we went through school, in junior high, it got a little worse. In high school, it got even worse. And then I learned that in college, where I went to the University of Michigan, hoping to be able to communicate, it wasn't very good in the classrooms either. I did learn how to communicate in Ann Arbor, but it wasn't in the classrooms. And I dropped out of college, not once, but twice, Shelley. And when I came back the second time, or when I dropped out the second time, my mom got me a job, and she got me a job at working as a child care worker in a state mental health facility. And that's where I learned that communication really was at the heart of all healing. I began to interact with these children in ways, they weren't really children. They were only 6 or 7 years younger than me, but in ways that, we were all healing, them and I, in communication and in connection. And I began to become very, very enchanted with this idea of the power of communication. And that's when I chose to go to medical school so that I could learn how to be a psychiatrist and bring communication open and honestly to the world. The psychiatrists that are already learning how to medicate people, that's what they were doing over there in the state hospital. And I was really against that. I just decided that that wasn't the way to actually treat people who were trying to communicate with each other.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, I got typecast over the next several years into being a pharmacologist, because that's the way the direction that psychiatry had taken. And so I didn't like being a pharmacologist, but I wrote over 100,000 prescriptions in my 30-year career. And I had over 40,000 patients. So there was like an opportunity for me to live a duplicitous life, a life that was misaligned with what it is I wanted to say and who I really wanted to be. At times, knowing that the medications were not doing what they were supposed to do. And sometimes were even making things worse. And this was very hard on me and, represented a soul sacrifice.
Yeah.
So over time, because of this pain and because I no longer wanted to do that anymore, no longer really could tolerate it, I eventually stopped medicating people on a regular basis. I began to take them off of their medicine even in times, and actually take them off of their diagnosis, because that's why they were taking medicine in the first place, and they got way better.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go fast forward to the last few years. I began to, again, really amplify the importance of conversation, communication, and human connection at the heart of all healing. And I
Yeah.
created a couple programs and wrote a couple books that were really focused on that. So Find Your True
Yeah.
Voice is a book that I wrote, and I also wrote a True Voice course, which helps people find their true voice and then deliver it using the template of none other than podcasting, like we're using today. So it's
Right.
a wonderful place to be able to communicate your truest views and your truest, observations about life in general.
Right. Yeah.
So, and ultimately, what we got to was really, I am committed to helping people actually dig down and rediscover their true voice, which has been there the whole time. Their inner child is what I heard someone say earlier today.
Oh,
Someone who,
inner child.
the inner
Mm,
child, the person who's
yeah.
been with you the whole time, the voice that's been with you even since you were a young person on this planet. And so that's who I've now become, is it just an ambassador for true voice. Now, when we start asking a
Mm,
real question, which is the question you asked, Renee, what's the greatest threat in the world? The
yeah.
greatest threat in the world is not a virus, and it's not climate change, and it's not even sex trafficking, and it's not even the war in Ukraine, or it's not racism, and
Yeah.
it's not who's in the Supreme Court, and it's not who's going to win this next election. It's
Mm-hmm.
nothing like that. Actually, all those things are pretty large, though, and I don't mean to diminish the impact that any of those things could have, and it really could wipe
Mm-hmm.
out the entire human race, many of those.
Yeah.
And they're massive things that, many of us are blaming and shaming and guilting about. But the greatest threat in the world is that we are collectively giving up on our true voice, and we are no longer communicating effectively that which we know to be true, our truth, the
Yeah.
truth. We are instead watering it down, fabricating, embellishing, exaggerating, and we are no longer
Mm,
speaking our true self with each other. Instead, we're
mm,
pretending to protect ourselves by pretending to be somebody else. We're pretending to be
mm,
somebody else in order to protect ourselves, is another way to put it. And that is a
mm.
preposterous, ludicrous, absurd way to go through life. Because if we don't speak
It
our
sure
voice,
is.
no one will ever hear us. And if we don't speak our true voice, no one will ever know us. And what all of us want more than anything in the world is to be heard. And how can we go through life if we're never even going to show anybody what it is that we stand for? It was
Right.
Henry David Thoreau
Right.
who said, "The mass of men go through life with in quiet desperation, and go to their graves with their songs still in them." This I
Mm,
find to be the greatest tragedy in all of humanity. And the fact is, why is that the greatest tragedy? Because all of these circumstances are going to require open discourse to get on the other side of. We're going to
mm,
have to learn how to communicate with each other effectively if we're going to deal with any of these world level calamities. And if we don't do that, then all or any of these threats are really just left at free range to do whatever they're going to do, and we'll never get on the other side of them. And it looks pretty bleak, like curtains to humanity. But if we can find a way to communicate with each other, it is possible to get across and get around all of these events in open communication and create solutions.
yeah.
Because if anybody, or if any species on the planet can create solutions, I have faith that it's humanity. With
Mm,
7.8
I
billion different
agree.
resources,
I
we
agree.
certainly could work this out if we would learn how
Yes.
to communicate.
And it's such, I mean, it's a very simple statement, to just speak your voice and, communicate more effectively. And I think, don't you think, Dr. Fred, if it's even walking down the street or in a shopping center or where there are a lot of people, just looking up, smiling and getting the conversations going, saying hi to people, being friendly and not letting all of that chaos in the mind get to us to where we can't even be ourselves.
Right.
Would you agree?
Yeah, I definitely would agree.
Yeah.
Like looking up or smiling at people or giving people a little
Yeah.
piece of pleasure, a little piece of humanity, a little piece of fraternity or brotherhood, sisterhood, like humanhood,
Yeah.
humankind.
Yeah.
That, it's a real opportunity to connect with another person. And you don't even really have to say anything. You could say good day or good morning or good evening or hello if you want, although that tends to freak people out in this crazy world of ours.
Yeah, it's almost
All
like
we
you
have to
don't expect it,
It's
you
like
know?
people are like, "Wow,
Yeah.
he's weird. He said hello to me."
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
we've
You
reached
know,
a point where
it,
communication is just really in a really dangerous ground.
it absolutely can be. And there was an example, and my son and I went to Dutch Boy, so I'm going to
Hmm.
give them a shout out. Dutch Boy, coffee, very famous coffee establishment.
Hmm.
Never been there. I went there a couple of weeks ago with my son. Long lines, and I'm like, what's so interesting about this place that there are lines of people waiting in their car to get to their drinks. Well, when we were arrived up to where we were getting our drinks, I saw why.
Hmm.
Because these folks, the gentleman, young man, he was probably 24 years old, and he was asking about our summer plans. He goes,
Hmm.
he was basically just very friendly, and it wasn't phony or anything. And we
Right.
actually had dialogue. Meanwhile, all these people are, waiting in line. Nobody seems to be upset. And
Right.
he's doing this with every car. Now, I don't know if he did the same, question to everybody, but it made me think that it was awkward and pleasant,
Yes.
because at first I thought, okay, I'm taking up too much time, but he was okay with it, so I was okay with it. And that's
Exactly.
just an example of, all those people in line, we feel this pressure to hurry and
Yeah.
to get from point A to point B and just move on,
Yeah.
And that's why I love that you have this movement, about the greatest threat on earth, or in the world,
Right.
where you, Dr. Fred, as a, advocate and someone who is doing deep work on this, research and things that you've been doing. I just really love that you're bringing this topic to the forefront,
Thank
because
you.
of the way, yeah, because the way we all communicate, I think there's times when you go to a doctor appointment, and I'm sure a lot of people have experienced this, where we don't speak up and we don't talk about our own health. We're afraid to, or we're in a, just afraid that we're going to take too much time from the doctor. But really, we need to be our own advocates when it comes to
We
our
do.
own well-being.
That's right. We absolutely do. And and you
Yeah.
mentioned like this person at Dutch Boy. What we want more than anything is we want to speak our true self. We want to be heard for who we are. All
Yeah.
7.8 billion of us. It's been shown, even through um, like neuroscience, that that's what
Mhm.
we want more than anything, is to be heard for who we are in our lifetime. But if we're unable or unwilling to reveal who we are, even when even when we're when it's requested or inquired,
Mhm.
we have created quite a little drama for ourselves, quite a little conundrum for ourselves. If we can't
Yeah.
speak our true voice even when it's being asked for, then we probably will never be able to speak it. And if we're never able to speak it, then we won't be able to take on the problems in the world or be able to resonate effectively with another person. Like what
Yeah.
it takes to resonate effectively is to be true to yourself first. Like tuning
Mhm.
forks, we humans have a certain vibration that can resonate with each other. But in
Mhm.
order to resonate with each other, just like a tuning fork, you have to kind of pull off the mold and the cobwebs and the dust and the mud that might be interfering with the vibration of that tuning fork. But if we
Mhm.
do that and we detoxify ourselves from all the intruders of delivering our true voice, most of which are internal, then what becomes possible is authentic harmonic resonance with each other, such that
Oh, I like that.
such a
Yeah.
communication becomes possible. And again, we don't want anything more in this world than to be heard for who we are. I can't tell you
Yeah.
how many people I've met in prisons or in nursing homes or in state hospitals or regular hospitals, or really even anywhere on the planet, who haven't been heard for who they are, and all I have to do is actually listen long enough to get them to believe that I understood who they were. And
Wow.
a massive amount of healing takes place at that very moment, no matter what they've done the rest of their life, no matter what crime they've committed or how sick they are otherwise.
Yeah, and I know that about you, where you're one of those very unique people that you're very intuitive, and you're also very personable. And I would love to see and have you share with our audience, how do you help people to find their true voice and
Yeah.
communicate more effectively?
Well, I think the first thing to do is really get, like, from the ground up, really get
Mhm.
each and every person to realize that there's nothing wrong with them.
Mm.
Like, we all think
Mhm.
there's something wrong with us personally. We all do. You probably do. I certainly
Yes,
do. All of us
yeah.
do. Yeah, that we're different. We're different. We're different than everyone else out there. And of course, that's because we compare our insides with everybody's outsides. And so
Mm,
we have this idea that we're different. But if we can see that there's nothing wrong with us and how we're responding to things, or what our opinions are about things, or what our thoughts or feelings are about things, are actually legitimate in their own right and worth expressing. Now, here's
yeah.
the deal, and this is really important. True voice is not a matter of going to the top of the mountain and screaming out loud how much you hate your mother-in-law. Like, that doesn't really work.
Yeah.
That's not true voice. The
No.
idea of true voice is to actually move the needle forward, like move the conversation forward in a positive direction. So the only reason to speak is to actually move a conversation forward. So what do you think the number one ingredient in having a good true voice is?
Oh my gosh, just being able to have the courage to speak the truth.
Exactly. And on the heels of what? On the heels of excellent listening, right? Like, you
Yes,
need to be able
most
to listen
definitely.
to who is that person that you're with, or what is the situation or the context that you find yourself in, so that when you speak, you are moving that needle forward. True
Yeah.
voice is a matter of moving that needle forward as a function of the listening you provide for the person or the situation that you're in. And
Mm.
then you can get an idea of how to move that conversation forward, and do so by bringing that true voice forward. You might find that being silent is a form of true voice. It's possible that the way to move that conversation forward is not to say anything. It is possible. Like, there are
Mhm.
times when what you have to say might not be welcome. You might notice there are times when we speak something just to, quote, get it off of our chest.
Mhm.
That's
I
actually
think
a
we've all
very
done that. Oh,
that's a
absolutely.
very selfish way to communicate.
Mhm.
Just
I
because
think so
something's on
too.
your chest. It's
Yeah.
a very selfish way to communicate. What we need to do is realize that when we're actually expressing something, our object, our responsibility, our accountability is to move that needle forward in that conversation. And
In a
just saying
yeah.
something to get it off of your chest doesn't get it off your chest, and B, doesn't work to move that conversation forward.
Yeah, it doesn't serve the conversation, and you don't
Doesn't
have
at
that
all.
person's best interest in mind. You're being like you said, it's very selfish, and I think
It's selfish.
a lot of conversations and that's such a good point. I mean, I never looked at it that way, where you wanna get something off your chest and you just wanna get it over with and say it. But
Right.
really, there's another way to position that in a more positive way and communicate better by asking more questions and having a better understanding, wouldn't you say?
Exactly. Exactly. Asking
Yeah,
questions is a great way to get through conversations rather than actually speaking your true voice because you want to get it off your chest. Like, I
yeah,
don't like the way you look, or I don't like the way you handle that, or something like that. I mean,
mhm,
sometimes that might be an important way to move the conversation forward. Maybe you're asking for feedback, or you're ready for feedback from me, and then giving you feedback, positive or negative, can become appropriate. But the
mhm,
bottom line is, if you're not moving that conversation forward, which is often the case when you're just saying something for your own personal wants and needs,
yeah,
rather than taking into consideration the context of the situation or the person or people that you're with, then you're doing something, it's frankly a little bit rude and certainly selfish, and not focused on the purpose of conversation, which is to move conversation the purpose of communication, which is to move conversations forward.
exactly, exactly, and I think even over the phone, where there are times where you're on a, conversation with someone, you've never met them before, but you're reaching out to them for whatever reason, and I think there's even a way to effectively communicate and be your authentic self,
There
and,
is.
doing that, and it goes from the phone to being in public to in your own home.
Exactly.
When you're speaking with your spouse or your children or right? It's
Exactly.
really everywhere around us.
Right, it is. So
Yeah.
communication, we count on communication, and we're a species that requires communication in order to get things done. And we
Mhm.
think that communication is speaking primarily, when in fact it isn't. There are many ways to communicate. There's an NLP edict that says something like, you cannot not communicate.
Mm.
You cannot not
Not
communicate.
communicate.
There's no such time that you're not communicating. So even if you're staying silent, saying something like, I didn't say anything, that
Mhm.
was a communication when you didn't say anything.
Right, or you just gave a facial expression,
Or a
right?
facial expression, yep,
Like
or
a
some
smile or
nonverbals. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
And
yeah.
and it's very important to realize that vocality is only one form of expression. In one of my books, The Creative Eight, Healing Through Creativity and Self-Expression, we
Hmm.
go through other ways to communicate. For instance, art, music, dancing, singing, drama,
Yeah.
cooking, writing, gardening, all of these ways are ways to communicate with the world around us. And
Hmm.
as long as we're being creative, we're also communicating. And then ultimately, and that's the punchline of the book, which is available at my site here that's on the ticker tape, the idea
Yeah.
of drfred360.com, where you can get access to both of my books for free, actually. And you can get
Oh,
access to
very nice.
podcasts that I've been on, and you can
Yeah.
get access to articles that I've written for Psychology Today, and a couple of
Mhm.
different PDFs that are there. When
Yeah.
you look at drfred360.com and see this book, you'll see that the Creative Eight is really built on helping people communicate as a way of relieving their own mental distress,
And
their own
yeah.
emotional imbalance.
Well, I want to kind of put something in there too, where I was at an event where you spoke and you introduced the eight, and everybody in the room was participating. They were excited, they were laughing, they were communicating. And I mean, it was just just for me to see everybody that was otherwise they would be shy or not talk to each other.
Exactly.
And it was powerful. The
Yeah.
whole room was lit up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the purpose of the book, and I think at that event down there in Irvine, the purpose of the book is to help people learn that even with just a minute or two a day of doing some form of art or music or dancing,
Yeah.
etc., you can alter who your whole trajectory of how your life is going at any particular time by
Yeah, and
doing
even
a
getting your
little.
day started,
That's
just
exactly
getting your
right.
day started. Yeah,
Exactly. You
yeah.
don't have to be a competent artist to do art, and you don't even have to be a musician to do music,
I
you
know.
know?
Well, they have the adult coloring books that you can get, versus the children's coloring books.
Exactly,
Yeah, or
exactly.
you
You
could
can
just make
definitely.
something up and color it.
Yep,
Yeah,
you can do that, or you can
yeah,
trace, or you can doodle, or whatever it is you
that's
wanna
right.
do. That's right.
And Dr. Fred, do you think that there's such a thing as over communicating? And is that dangerous, or is it something that you would recommend?
Right. So I think I don't know exactly what you're referring to. I think that there is, on the one hand, over communicating would be when you say a little bit too much or take up too much room, take up too much space in a conversation.
Yeah, and that's what
So
I'm referring to.
right. I think
Absolutely.
that I wouldn't recommend doing that. I think that that
Mhm,
actually, takes away from one's credibility a little bit. And
mhm.
it takes away, the fact is you can't listen while you're talking.
Very
And
true.
and the most important feature of communication is in fact listening. So if
Yeah.
you're going to be talking more often than the other person, or sort of hogging the time, which I now at least am self-conscious about doing, and even in this conversation,
Mhm.
having you brought it up, like there's an opportunity to really get that you cannot listen when you're talking. And the most important piece of effective communication is to listen closely to what's being called for.
Right, and that's what I've been doing during this conversation because I everything that comes out of your mouth and your, true authentic self is powerful. The
Thank you.
things that you bring up, Dr. Fred, just the way that you communicate and help other people. And I know too that you also speak for different organizations, companies, and who do you think is an ideal or an organization that would be a great fit for any of the talks that you give, or
Well,
a
I
couple of
think
different?
sure. I think the organizations that are best suited for like small to medium sized organizations, who the CEOs or the C suites, the mid
Mhm,
range, leaders in the program already realize that there is a communication adrift, that they're
mhm,
realizing that there is a problem inside of communication between maybe different levels or even inside the same level, where people
yeah,
are not really feeling like they're being self-expressed or respected for who they are. This is really, really important, and that group could use a little boost for sure. So the conversations I have about finding true voice or using creativity and communication can be very effective to move those people forward. And as a consultant, I can do work inside of these small business organizations, medium sized businesses, to come in for a short period of time, listen to everybody, and then help everybody create the avenues so that open communication can then be restored. It's
yeah,
funny. Some companies really shy away from open communication and think that it's somehow
They
dangerous.
do. Absolutely, they
It's
do.
amazing. They
Yeah,
would rather have their people muted than actually speaking what's important to them. And those are not companies that I want to work with. If that's what you want
yeah,
for your company, I have no interest in working with you. The
yeah.
companies that I'm interested in working are the companies who are interested in hearing each and every employee and each and every collaborator, like what it is that they have to say so we can all move that needle forward.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. So you heard it right here with Dr. Fred. So if you are a company that really needs to kind of open up the conversation with your
Yeah, the
employees, your
channels.
teams, your leadership, yeah, that would be ideal for you to get in there and help them. And I love the fact, Dr. Fred, that when you go back and you look at all those prescriptions that you wrote over all the 30 years that you were doing that kind of work. Now it's I just love the work that you're doing because you're really helping people. It helps with kindness, it helps with world humanity, and I think just a lot of the processes and things that you bring to groups really brings people together in a way that it could be forever changed.
Yeah.
It's not like they're going to learn and they're going to go back and I'm not going to implement that, but you truly get through to people, and that's why I'm so fortunate to be able to work with you.
Thank
Really,
you. Yeah, yeah. Alignment is really what we're all after, and ultimately, authenticity is very addicting. So
it is. Yeah.
when we start actually speaking our truest voice, people wonder how difficult it is. It's way more interesting and intriguing to be authentic than to be lying or fibbing or pretending to be somebody else in order to protect yourself. Like
Yes.
once you start creating authenticity, everybody in the room sees a space for them to also create authenticity. So when I have
Mhm.
conversations with you, I would submit that one of the reasons that we have great conversations is that inside of both of our commitments to being authentic, the
Mhm.
other person feels like there's room to be authentic because we're counting on each other to keep that space open.
Yeah, most definitely. And for those of you that I know we're streaming on multiple platforms. We're streaming on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and this show is also uploaded to iTunes, iHeartRadio, and all the your listening podcast apps that you listen to. So if you're at the gym and you want to listen to this, please just go to Luminary Leaders Live. And this is Dr. Fred Moss with me today. And Dr. Fred, what would you recommend for people that just they feel muted and they want to just blurb out or blast, they just want to be heard? What
Right.
would you recommend for them?
So the first thing to do is really realize that there's nothing wrong with you, as I've said, that there might be
Yeah.
nothing wrong with you, that what you have to say is worthwhile.
Mhm.
And that, you want to make sure it's not what you have to say isn't welcome in all settings. So that's very true too. And
Right.
the idea is that you want to make incremental changes. So you don't want to make super large changes, and you want to make the incremental changes with the people in the life that matter to you most.
Mhm.
Many of us don't even know our spouses and won't let our spouses know each other. Well, won't
Mhm.
let our spouses know ourselves. That's
Mhm.
because we don't speak our true voice even to our spouses or even to our family members or the people that are
Ah,
close to us. We keep up an image and a persona that is not consistent with who we know we really are. I
hmm.
invite those people that when you become really aware of what it is that you haven't said to your friends, what it is that you haven't said to your spouse or your significant other, that you practice in the mirror. You might even want to like take a look at yourself and have a conversation with yourself in the mirror and notice what that person in the mirror, how they respond when you say something that is actually authentic.
Hmm.
Taking incremental changes and saying even small things that you haven't said ever or you haven't said in a while, telling someone that about something you did that you feel guilty about, or telling them how much you care about them or how much you love them or something. This becomes
Yeah.
really just incremental steps towards authenticity, and I expect, and I kind of know this to be true, that once you start being authentic, authenticity actually trumps agreement 100% of the time. And
Hmm.
authenticity is addicting. Once you start really doing it, you'll start seeing that the opening that comes from being yourself um, is much more interesting and intriguing than anything you've been doing to protect yourself.
Yeah, and it's almost like you're seeing another side of someone.
Exactly.
And, you see, I mean, think of it when we're listening to someone's story and they're telling a story so authentically, we're drawn to it.
Exactly.
And we love the way that, they're sharing their background, or like with you, you're being your true authentic self, and you're always your true authentic self. I mean, ever since I've known you and that we've been working together. And I think if a lot more people had listened to how you have brought this to the forefront, it would be significant for teams and just people in the world. I mean,
Hmm.
everywhere people could be practicing this.
You're right. It
Yeah.
does take something. Being authentic is an important piece of communication, and it just allows for
Mhm.
that harmonic resonance. And have you
Yeah.
noticed that there's sometimes, like you've already referred to this, there's people who might be diametrically opposed to you in one of those things that we were talking about, one of those areas,
Yeah.
like one of these divisive areas that are already set up for us to argue about.
Yeah.
And you are able to listen to somebody who has that opinion that is completely different than yours, as long as they're being authentic. If
Mhm.
they're actually speaking from their heart about how they got to be who they got to be, about whatever the topic is that you think they're dead wrong about, you
Yeah.
still can listen to them if they're being authentic. And
Yeah.
that juxtaposed to the people who are agreeing with you just because they don't want to cause any kind of flame, those
Mhm.
people are not being authentic and are not very interesting ultimately. It is the
Yeah.
person who's being authentic, even if they're being entirely opposed to what it is your opinion. So content isn't
Mhm.
what's important. What's important more than anything is a genuine, honest authenticity.
I'm in total agreement. And a real quick story that I'll share is I have a very close family member, and we do not see eye to eye on politics. And it came to the point where I did not even want to be around that person. And they knew it. And, each time that we were around each other, I had to really speak up when that topic started to kind of lean towards politics. And I said, I made a very strong claim, and I said, I would much rather focus on family and our relationship and not have to deal with politics, because
Right.
I'm never going to agree with you, you
Right.
know? And that's what it took. I was authentically myself, and it changed the dynamic of that relationship in such a great way.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a couple choices there. There's the idea of telling that person that you can't really be with them because that what they have to say is insulting to you or offensive to you.
Yes.
And there's another piece to that, which is the idea of being able to tolerate the opposite viewpoint, at least
Mhm.
tolerate it, even such that the conversation, you can love the person anyways. Can you love the person
Yeah.
anyways? And
Right.
like ho'oponopono, I love you, I'm sorry, thank you, please forgive me.
Yeah.
You really, really get through that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, gosh, kind of in closing, Dr. Fred, what do you want people to know all over the world? This is going to be available. This broadcast will be available all over the world. What do you want people to know?
I think the number one thing to know is there might be nothing wrong with you. There really might be. Even if you're certain that there's something wrong with you, that only puts you in the majority. We all think there's something wrong with us, so it's quite normal to think that there's something wrong with you. And
Yeah,
there might not be. So the idea that you might think you have a psychiatric condition of anxiety disorder, depressive disorder, social phobia, post-traumatic stress disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, or some sort of spectrum-based disorder, or some sort of bipolar disorder, or schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, all
oh my
these
gosh,
disorders.
that's exhausting, right?
Yeah, it's exhausting. And maybe you don't have any of those.
Yeah.
And
What
when
about
you,
people? Well, what if I may? So, what about people that are preoccupied, that are walking around, they're just in their own head,
yeah,
and they're not really paying attention to other people, and they're preoccupied? What do you recommend for those kind of folks?
well,
Because
those
I see
people
a lot of them.
more than likely, most of those people have already been diagnosed with something and are taking medications that are actually causing that behavior.
Okay.
So it isn't
Okay.
a those people are not just simply like eating good foods and keeping themselves detoxed and drinking a lot of water and doing their exercises and meditation and mindfulness programs that are
Yeah.
really required to keep ourselves above water and radiant. They're not
Mhm.
doing that. They're actually taking medicines each and every day and have already bought the notion that they have a diagnosis, probably from a psychiatrist or an institution somewhere, and
Yeah.
then they're walking around talking to themselves or homeless or whatever, and we think there's something
Mhm.
wrong with them, when if you took their medicine there'd be something wrong with you too. You'd be doing exactly what
That's
they do.
true.
The
Yeah, that's true.
medicines often cause, increase, or perpetuate the symptoms they're marketed to treat. So
Mhm.
that's the problem, is that when we start thinking there's something wrong with us, we then go down that track of needing some form of treatment or fixing. And then we go into the psychiatric industrial complex and get medications. And
Mm.
those medications and the diagnosis itself sometimes actually creates the symptoms that actually makes us think that there's something wrong with us. So it's
Mhm.
often the horse in front of the cart in front of the
Cart
horse,
in front of the
and
horse.
that's we get a real problem that way. So if
Mm.
people around the world want to know one thing, it's that your voice is welcome. Who you really are when you're actually moving that needle forward is totally welcome. The world is completely interested in who you are. Your loved ones and the people in your world are completely
Mhm.
curious about your real and honest self. No matter whether you think you have a diagnosis or if there's something wrong with you, doesn't mean that there
Mhm.
is.
Yeah, that's a fantastic sentence, what you just said.
Thank
And
you.
I hope that people really take that to heart because and rewind this to hear that again, because what you just said is, I mean, that puts everything in perspective. It
Right.
really does. It really does.
Yeah,
Yeah,
each and every person really deserves a great deal of respect for making it this far.
I
Period.
agree.
Every second is a challenge, and it's a challenge
Yeah.
for them just like it's a challenge for us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Fred, this has been such a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
I want to, direct people to drfred360.com. You heard it here on Luminary Leaders Live. You can go to that website. He has books available, other podcast shows that he's been on, and Dr. Fred has written articles that are just, I mean, they're extraordinary. So I
Thank
would
you.
highly recommend that you check out drfred360.com. And we want to thank our sponsor, which is Endeavor Mortgage with Dan Leonard out in Seal Beach. We appreciate your sponsorship, Dan. And yeah, and as far as Dr. Fred, what's next for you before we close?
Yeah, I think what's next for me is to really step into this brand and really be the life optimization specialist that I now call myself. So the idea is that I can help people actually get to their true self, rediscover
Mm.
that true self of theirs, and apply it inside of their business, apply it inside of their family, apply it inside of their important relationships. And I like speaking on stages, and I like, teaching
Yeah.
and facilitating masterminds and one-to-one coaching. Now it's a matter of really setting up my brand or setting up my company so that there is all that kind of boring stuff like standard operating procedures and key performance indicators and mission, vision, and purpose statements. Like creating an actual
Yeah.
business that's sustainable is what's next for me. I want to say one more thing to your listeners, which is
Please.
if you do go to my site, the drfred360.com, what I invite you to do so that we can become friends is to go to the contacts, which is it's a particular icon on that page. And then you can text me. And if you text me your name and your email, I'll be able to send you another free book, like a free gift that I'd be glad to
Oh,
send you. So
nice.
that would be super cool if you could do that if you go to my site. So thank you for that.
Oh, most definitely. And we'll make sure that it's in all the show notes too. Most
Beautiful.
definitely, Dr. Fred. Well, we want to thank everyone for tuning in with us today. And like I always say, go back to the beginning to catch this whole episode because it was very, I mean, just so informative. And you heard it here with Dr. Fred today and the greatest threat in the world. And you will have to go back and listen to the beginning to find out what that is if you're just catching us. So, Dr. Fred, again, thank you so much for being here. And we want to thank our audience for tuning in and make sure that you subscribe to Luminary Leaders Live to catch this episode and all of our other episodes. And I'm sure, Dr. Fred, we're going to have more conversations on Luminary Leaders Live.
For sure.
For
I'd love to
sure.
be here. And
For sure.
anything I can do, let me know. Yep.
I appreciate that. All right. Well, take care, everyone, and we will catch you next time. Thank you.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye bye.